In the warm, hazy glow of 1960s television, there was a world that felt safe and predictable. It was a world of wholesome families and gentle problems that were all wrapped up in a neat 30-minute bow. And right in the heart of it all, a New York City penthouse became home to a new kind of American family, where a bachelor uncle and his proper English butler took on the job of raising 3 orphaned kids. This was the world of Family Affair, a show that captured the hearts of a nation. At the very core of its charm were the young siblings, Buffy and Jody. With his bright red hair, a spray of freckles, and a smile that could melt just about anyone, little Johnny Whitaker, as Jody Davis, became one of the most beloved child stars of his generation. He was America's kid brother, a weekly visitor in millions of homes. The show, which ran from 1966 to 1971, is a cornerstone of classic TV, a touchstone for a generation that grew up with the Davis family. The laughter and the lessons are all preserved in the amber of syndication, replayed for decades as a seemingly perfect time capsule. But perfection is usually an illusion, a pretty picture built for the cameras. Behind the heartwarming scripts, the reality for a child actor in 1960s Hollywood was anything but simple. It was a world of intense pressure, long hours, and experiences that could leave scars no one could see. For Johnny Whitaker, the legacy of Family Affair isn't just about fame. It's also a story of deep difficulty, a journey that took him to some very dark places. And at the heart of it all lies a painful memory, symbolized by a single episode filmed in the show's first year, an episode so tied to a deep-seated trauma that, even now, nearly 60 years later, it represents a part of his past he has no desire to ever revisit. For millions, he was the lovable, freckle-faced kid from one of TV's most iconic families. His on-screen adventures with his sister Buffy were a weekly dose of joy. But what if one of those cherished episodes, a single half-hour from 1966, holds the key to a trauma so deep that it's come to represent a pain that has lasted for over half a century? What could have possibly happened on the set of such a beloved sitcom to leave such a lasting mark on its young star? The answer isn't simple, and it pulls back the curtain on the often unseen price of childhood fame. This is a story about more than just one bad day at work. It's about a system that, in its race to create entertainment, often forgot it was dealing with children. As we unravel this story, based on Whitaker's own reflections, we begin to see that behind Jody's innocent smile was a little boy navigating a world that no child should have to face alone. To understand the weight of Johnny Whitaker's story, you have to get just how big Family Affair was in the late 1960s. When it premiered on CBS on September 12, 1966, TV was full of traditional sitcoms and westerns. Family Affair was different. The premise was a mix of heartbreak and humor. Bill Davis, a successful and worldly engineer, is a bachelor living the high life in a massive Manhattan penthouse when his world is turned upside down. After his brother and sister-in-law die in an accident, he becomes the guardian to their 3 children, 15-year-old Sissy, and 6-year-old siblings, Buffy and Jody. The culture clash was instant and charming. You had Uncle Bill, played by the great Brian Keith, a man used to blueprints, not bedtime stories. Then there was his gentleman's gentleman, Mr. Giles French, played by Sebastian Cabot, a man of perfect order who was suddenly wrangling the beautiful chaos of childhood. Into this adult world tumbled the kids, bringing a whirlwind of questions and needs that neither man was ready for. Kathy Garver played Sissy, the teenage sister trying to grow up while also helping to raise her younger siblings. But the undeniable heart of the show was the youngest duo. Anissa Jones, as the pigtailed Buffy, was instantly iconic, always clutching her doll, Mrs. Beasley, which became a best-selling toy itself. And right there with her was Johnny Whitaker as Jody. With his fiery red hair and can't-keep-him-down spirit, Jody was the quintessential American boy. Whitaker had a natural charm that the camera just loved. He could nail a punchline one minute and then break your heart with a single look the next. He was just 6 years old when he landed the part, but he was already a pro. Whitaker started out in commercials at age 3 and had already been in the movie, The Russians Are Coming, where he worked with Brian Keith. It was Keith himself who suggested the kid for the role of his nephew. Originally, the script had the younger kids at different ages, but when producers saw the incredible chemistry between Whitaker and Anissa Jones, they made a key change: they would be the same age. It was a stroke of genius. The bond between Jodie and Buffy became the show's anchor. They were a team, figuring out their strange new world together. The show was a ratings powerhouse and a fixture in the top 20. It was gentle TV. The problems were soft: Jodie learning to tell the truth, Buffy being afraid of the dark, Sissy having her first crush. Uncle Bill would offer wisdom, and Mr. French would chime in with his own dry wit. Each episode was a mini morality play wrapped in the cozy blanket of family love. For millions of viewers, it was appointment television. The actors who played the Davis family became household names, and Johnny Whitaker was launched into the stratosphere of child stardom. He was no longer just an actor, he was Jodie, the freckle-faced kid who'd found a home in the hearts of the entire country. On the surface, it was a fantasy. A 6-year-old boy at the center of a television universe. But the Hollywood dream, especially for a kid, often comes with a steep price, one paid with a lost childhood. The sweet scenes that everyone watched at home were the product of long, grueling days on a soundstage, a manufactured world that was anything but kid-friendly. Behind the smiles and the illusion of a happy family, a different story was playing out, one driven by production schedules and the shockingly lax child labor laws of the 1960s. Today, child actors are protected by strict rules about work hours and schooling, but the Hollywood of the 1960s was the Wild West. Johnny Whitaker has spoken about this reality in interviews years later, painting a picture that's a world away from the show's wholesome image. The hours were brutal. A child actor could be on set from early in the morning until late at night, a practice Whitaker later called actual child endangerment. This wasn't just a job, it was an all-consuming life that left almost no time for just being a kid. While other children were in school or playing with friends, Johnny was on set, surrounded by adults, under hot lights, expected to perform on cue, over and over again. This is the crucial background for the trauma symbolized by that one episode in 1966. It likely wasn't a single, catastrophic event you could put in a headline. It seems to have been the breaking point from the immense, systemic pressure placed on such a young child. The refusal to watch this particular episode isn't about a bad performance, it's an emotional rejection of a deeply damaging time in his life. The episode itself becomes a symbol for a period of intense distress. It stands for the moment the weight of being a child star became too much to bear, when the illusion of a happy, family affair shattered against the hard reality of his working life. The specific details of what happened during the filming of this 1966 episode remain private to Whitaker, but he's been clear about the emotional toll. It's tied to a traumatic on-set experience that captured the fundamental wrongness of his situation. In a high-pressure environment with few safeguards, where the main goal was to get the shot, a child's well-being could easily become an afterthought. Imagine being 6 years old, exhausted, confused, and lonely. Now, imagine something going wrong, a director losing their temper, a scene that's emotionally draining, a moment of intense fear or humiliation. For an adult, it's a bad day at the office. For a child, it can be a traumatic event that sticks with them for life. This is the shadow that hangs over Family Affair, a dark secret hiding in plain sight. To be a child star in the 1960s was to live a life of paradox. On one hand, you had the adoration of millions and the thrill of being on TV. On the other, there was a deep, constant isolation. Johnny Whitaker's peers weren't kids in the neighborhood, they were the adult cast and crew. His classroom was a trailer, and playtime was squeezed in between scenes. This strange upbringing created a disconnect from the very world he was supposed to be representing on screen. The pressure was relentless. Brian Keith, the show's star, was a true professional, but he worked on a famously tight schedule. Keith had a unique contract that allowed him to shoot his scenes in concentrated blocks, freeing him up for movies. This meant production had to be incredibly efficient. There was no time for a child to have an off day. The expectation was to hit your mark and say your lines, take after take. For a boy who was 6, 7, or 8 years old, the strain must have been enormous. Acting requires you to tap into deep emotions, but for a child on that kind of schedule, there was no support system to help process those feelings. You were just expected to turn it on for the camera and off again when the director yelled, "Cut." This emotional labor, combined with the long hours, created a perfect storm for trauma. A child's brain is still learning how to handle emotions and make sense of the world. When that development is disrupted by a high-stress, adult environment, the long-term consequences can be severe. We've seen this pattern over and over with child stars from that era. They were assets, commodities that brought in ratings. Their humanity, their vulnerability, their simple need to be kids, often got lost in the Hollywood machine. The story of Whitaker's on-screen sister, Anissa Jones, is the most tragic example of this toxic environment. Jones, who was 8 when the series began, reportedly never wanted to be an actress in the first place. She was forever typecast as Buffy, and when Family Affair ended in 1971, she couldn't escape the role. The pigtails and the doll became a prison. She was teased endlessly when she tried to go back to a normal school. Feeling trapped, she fell into drugs and delinquency. On August 28, 1976, just 5 years after the show ended, Anissa Jones died of a massive drug overdose. She was only 18 years old. Her death was a devastating blow, a dark testament to the industry's failure to protect its young. For Johnny Whitaker, losing his on-screen sister was a life-altering event. He saw firsthand the ultimate price of their shared experience. It highlighted the dangers they had both faced and the damage that could result from a childhood spent in the spotlight. While Whitaker would walk a different path, his own struggles grew from this same poisoned soil. The trauma he associates with 1966 wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of neglect that defined what it meant to be a child star back then and would cast a long, dark shadow over the rest of his life. So, what really happened during the filming of that one episode in 1966? While Johnny Whitaker has chosen to keep the specific details private, a decision that has to be respected, we can understand the nature of the trauma by looking at the environment he was in. The story of the unwatchable episode isn't really about a single, dramatic event. It's about a breaking point. It represents the moment when all the pressure, exhaustion, and emotional labor piled up into one defining, traumatic experience. Think about the year, 1966. This was the first season of Family Affair. Johnny was just a 6-year-old kid. The show was new, expectations were high, and the crew was still finding its groove. This is when a child is most vulnerable, still getting used to a completely foreign world. The trauma Whitaker speaks of is tied to the lack of protection for kids on set. This wasn't about physical danger, but psychological and emotional danger. In the 1960s, a child's mental health wasn't a major concern. A director yelling at a kid to make them cry wasn't seen as abuse, it was a technique. Working a child until they were exhausted wasn't endangerment, it was just getting the job done. The system lacked empathy. We can imagine the kinds of things that were common on sets back then. Was it a moment of public humiliation? Was it an adult in a position of power losing their temper over a flubbed line? Was it the toll of a difficult scene that he couldn't shake off, with no one there to help him? Imagine being 6 and told to cry on command. Directors had all sorts of tricks, some of them emotionally manipulative, to get the right reaction. Now imagine being that child, feeling real distress, and then getting no comfort, just a, "Good job, kid, let's move on." The trauma is the realization, even at that age, that your feelings don't matter as much as the final product. It's the quiet understanding that you are a tool. That 1966 episode, therefore, isn't just a collection of scenes, it's a monument to that painful lesson. It's the time marker for a loss of innocence, not just for his character, Jody, but for the real boy whose childhood security was eroding. Whitaker's refusal to watch it is an act of self-preservation. To watch it would be to revisit the fear, confusion, and powerlessness of that 6-year-old boy. The specific trigger may be his to keep, but the cause is clear. It was the systemic failure of Hollywood to remember that a child actor is, first and foremost, a child. The trauma wasn't in the script, it was in the conditions. That one episode is the container for all the pain of that experience, a half-hour of television he has sealed off to protect himself from the ghosts of his past. We're about to explore how this experience shaped the rest of Johnny Whitaker's life, from a harrowing battle with addiction to finding a new and profound purpose. It is a story of incredible resilience. But first, if you believe in understanding the true stories behind the Hollywood glamour, please take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Your support helps us bring more of these hidden stories to light. When Family Affair was cancelled in 1971, the actors were suddenly set adrift. For Johnny Whitaker, then 12, it was the end of the only life he'd really known. He kept working, starring in Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, and a few Disney movies like Tom Sawyer. But growing up is tough for anyone, and for a child star, it's a minefield. The world knew him as Jody Davis. They weren't ready to accept him as anything else. As a teenager, he tried to step away from the industry. After high school, he served a 2-year mission for his church in Portugal. When he returned, he found Hollywood had moved on. The cute kid was now a man, and the industry that built him up was no longer interested. As Christopher Knight of The Brady Bunch once put it, Hollywood loves its puppies, but once they grow up, they're kicked to the curb. Whitaker felt that firsthand, the unresolved trauma from his childhood, the pressures of fame, and the tragic death of Anissa Jones created a perfect storm. He felt lost. And like so many others on that path, he looked for an escape in self-destruction, starting a battle with drugs and alcohol that would take over his life for years. His spiral was accelerated by personal heartbreak. In 1984, he got married, but just 4 years later, his wife left him for the best man at their wedding. The betrayal was absolute. For Whitaker, who had been raised in a devoutly religious home, this shattered his faith. He told Fox News that he lost his faith in God and man and the world, and made a conscious choice to drop into sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That period lasted for nearly a decade. He has spoken openly about the depths of his addiction, about losing his home, his job, and himself. At one point, he was declared clinically dead from an overdose before being revived. The bright, smiling boy from Family Affair was gone, replaced by a man wrestling with a pain that was threatening to consume him. It seemed like the shadow of Jody Davis might swallow him for good. The turning point came from the one anchor he had left, his family. Seeing him spiral, they staged an intervention. They gave him a brutal ultimatum: get clean, or be cut off from the family. The threat of losing them was the wake-up call he desperately needed. It was a painful, humiliating, and ultimately life-saving moment. On September 25, 1997, Johnny Whitaker finally committed to sobriety. The road back would be long, but it was the first step out of the darkness. Getting sober wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new one. As Johnny Whitaker worked through his recovery, he began to understand the roots of his addiction. He recognized his struggles weren't a moral failure, but a direct result of the unresolved trauma of being a child star. That realization didn't excuse his choices, but it did explain them. And in that understanding, he found a new mission. He became a certified drug and alcohol counselor, dedicating his life to helping people who were on the same dark path he had once traveled. He didn't just teach from a textbook, he spoke from the heart, with the authority of someone who had been there. His work has been wide-ranging and impactful. He founded a non-profit, Paso por Paso, to help Spanish-speaking addicts find recovery. He has worked as a